Ray Comfort can ever be relied on to post something vile or inflammatory. Dumb as a brick he may choose to stay, but ever the slick salesman, he knows how to manipulate the emotions of his uneducated flock, and knows also that by doing so his income stream will continue undiminished by reason or logic. I shall gloss over his comments on Josh Duggar, as I suspect he will have to rethink them in the near future. I will only highlight the fact that Comfort had the opportunity in 2 posts to mention the victims of Duggar's abuse, but chose instead to condemn the Learning Channel for dropping 19 Kids and Counting from its schedule, and then stating that he would be standing by my friend Josh Duggar as a brother in Christ. This was in his BC days. Such were some of us. I would further mention that many of the comments excusing Duggar have concentrated on the fact that he was 14 when the detailed offences took place. This would suggest that he was somehow less culpable because of his age. Of course, he could only be less culpable if he was less capable of making considered, rational decisions. If someone at 14 is incapable of making considered, rational decisions, then perhaps no one should be filling their heads with Bible stories from long ago which they have no ability to consider with reason and logic. And this takes me to another of Ray's recent posts about a 15-year-old's amazing conversion. This short video is about a decent enough seeming kid brought up in a fundamentalist home and fundamentalist environment out on a farm somewhere, who begins to question his Christian faith way back in October 2013. He then indulged in sin, whatever that means, until May 2014, a whole 6 months, until he was introduced to some Ray Comfort videos, including Evolution vs. God. These videos led him to Ray Comfort's merchandise, and he lapped up Ray's productions. And lo, he was saved. You will note that at no point did this kid seek out anything except fundamentalist teachings. He had simply rebelled against authority for a couple of months. There's no suggestion that he seriously applied any logic or reason to his decision, or spent any time educating himself beyond viewing the fundamentalist publications which were presented to him. Which is not surprising. No more surprising than the fact that he did not have the inhibitions in place to restrain himself from acting on his base desires. Any of Ray's flock might want to end their viewing here, because I'm going to talk a bit of science. Up until the end of the 20th century, it was thought that most of the development of the human brain took place in the early years of childhood. In the last few years, the development of magnetic resonance imaging and microelectronics used in monitoring and manipulating brain signals has fundamentally changed that view. Scientists around the world have embraced technological advances with far-reaching implications for the way we understand brain development, impairment, and human behavior. The behavior of adolescents, once put down to hormones, is now becoming better understood in the light of discoveries brought about by structural and functional MRI scanning techniques. Structural MRI gives researchers a photograph-like snapshot in high resolution of the brain, allowing them to analyze the structure of the brain and its various parts. Functional MRI gives researchers a moving image of blood flow through the brain, blood flow being directly linked to neuronal activity. Adolescence is defined as the ages between the onset of puberty and adulthood. Of course, the definition of adulthood is currently defined socially, politically, and legally, rather than scientifically. We know that generally, when compared to mature adults, whatever they are, adolescents can be more emotional, more impulsive, less inhibited, be less conscious of others' feelings, have poor decision-making abilities, make repeated mistakes, and are more subject to peer pressure. The results of large-scale MRI studies are showing the reasons for this. The human brain reaches 90% of its adult size by the age of 6, but is still far from mature. The prefrontal cortex is proportionally much larger in humans than in any other animal. The prefrontal cortex is involved in decision making and planning, social behavior, and the inhibitions of inappropriate behavior. Structural MRI scans show that the prefrontal cortex of the adolescent brain continues to develop. Though the brain grows little, the creases or folds of the prefrontal cortex become more complex, and the amount of grey matter peaks slightly earlier in the female brain and then declines. This is thought to be due to the process of synaptic pruning, in which unused synaptic pathways are pruned away and synapses which are being used are strengthened in a well-accepted process of use it or lose it brain development. It is during this pruning process that the prefrontal cortex begins to play a bigger part in inhibiting impulsive behavior, and adolescents become less uninhibited, more considerate of others, and develop their empathic and cognitive reasoning skills. This pruning process is thought to be heavily dependent on environment and education. The prefrontal cortex is still undergoing significant development into our 20s, allowing our emotional limbic system greater reign on our thoughts and actions. The inconsiderate adolescent is not a myth. It is the prefrontal cortex which gives us our ability to consider the needs of others, to empathize with them, to interpret their emotional states and react appropriately, in essence, to not be self-centered. As Shakespeare's shepherd spake in The Winter's Tale, I would there were no age between 16 and 23, or that youth would sleep at the rest. For there is nothing in the between, but getting wenches with child, wronging the ancientry, stealing, fighting. But the shepherd continues, Hark you now, would any but these boiled brains of 19 and 22 hunt this weather? Perhaps we are able to send our adolescents out to fight and die for us in foreign lands, because we can manipulate their limbic emotional drives and lack of cognitive abilities to our advantage, if not theirs. Modern science and technology allows us to learn more about the development and function of the brain every day. We now know that the wiring of our brains during our formative years is due in a great part by our environment and education, and that our ability to control our emotional desires by applying reason and logic does not develop until late adolescence. Of course, even after our ability to apply reason and logic has developed, we have to learn how to apply it, and even then we may have to choose to painfully confront 20 years of education and emotional indoctrination before we can shed ourselves of the nonsense we were taught to believe as children. Thank you as always for watching.